In October 2025, after months of relative calm in Yemen, the UAE-backed Southern Transitional Council, STC, launched a surprise offensive. They seized control of Shabwa province, Yemen's largest, along with nearly all of the country's oil and gas reserves. Their goal? Declare independence, join the Abraham Accords, and potentially gain U.S. recognition. But within weeks, it collapsed. Saudi Arabia launched a counteroffensive, crushing the STC and sending its leader into exile. The separatist movement now lies in tatters, and the Houthis are poised to exploit the chaos. But the calm didn't last. On December 2nd, the Southern Transitional Council, STC, broke ranks with Yemen's internationally recognized government and launched a surprise offensive into Hadramaut, the country's largest province, covering nearly a third of Yemen's land. Within a week, the STC overran the entire province, then seized neighboring Al-Mahra as well. In one lightning move, they captured hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, and with it, roughly 80% of Yemen's proven oil and gas reserves. For the STC, those resources were the key to their ultimate goal: secession and a viable independent state. With their rapid military advances, the STC was able to capture virtually all of the territory that used to make up the former independent state of South Yemen, which was uniquely the Arab world's only communist state that had historically existed between 1967 and 1990, before it unified with North Yemen. And with their capture of all of the oil and gas fields, the STC put themselves in a position to credibly declare their full secession and independence from Yemen as well. What is even more incredible is that the STC managed to accomplish all of this without any extensive fighting. STC troops effectively managed to just march through the two governorates with little resistance from local, internationally recognized, government-affiliated tribes and troops. The STC reported that just 16 of their own fighters were killed during the week-long offensive, while the internationally recognized government reported that only 32 of their own personnel were killed. These are stunning figures for how enormous the gains made by the STC are, and how categorically this shifted the balance of power within Yemen. So why did the STC launch this offensive when they did? There were multiple reasons converging at once. There had been talk of the Saudis and the Houthis renewing their peace negotiations after years of delays, following the Houthi ceasefires with Israel and the United States. Still under unrelenting U.S. financial sanctions, the Houthis were known to be demanding a large share of Yemen's oil wealth in a future negotiated settlement as a means of economic relief. The STC's seizure of all of those oil fields in Hadramaut could have been a way to preempt those negotiations, by securing the oil fields for themselves for their own long-term secession project. 2 weeks before the STC offensive, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman visited Washington and asked President Trump to expand sanctions against the UAE-backed Rapid Support Forces in Sudan, a direct threat to Emirati interests. The UAE likely responded by greenlighting the STC's attack on Hadramaut, hoping to pull Saudi and American attention away from Sudan. The more immediate trigger: in late November, Saudi-backed tribal forces in Hadramaut began blocking oil production, causing shortages in STC areas. The STC saw this as a threat to their future. By seizing the oil fields, they gambled on securing the resources needed for independence. But the move was risky because Yemen is a tangled proxy war. The UAE backs the STC's secession. Saudi Arabia backs the internationally recognized government and territorial integrity. Iran backs the Houthis. All three oppose each other, yet for years the STC and the Saudi-backed government had cooperated against their common Houthi enemy, who have fired hundreds of missiles at Saudi cities and even struck Abu Dhabi in 2022. Both the UAE and Saudi Arabia want a pacified Yemen that is free of Iranian influence and no longer shoots back at them. But Yemen is also just further away from the UAE than it is from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia prefers a united and calm Yemen, as it was prior to 2014. At the same time, the UAE sees Yemen as just a component in its greater overall strategy to build a ring of influence across the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa, to connect to its other allies in the region, like the RSF in Sudan, the El-Sisi regime in Egypt, Eritrea, and the breakaway state of Somaliland. The Saudis, meanwhile, have backed factions in Yemen's internationally recognized government like Islah, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, whose ideology of political Islam horrifies the UAE, and why the UAE steadily came to back the more secular STC in their secession project in South Yemen instead. So despite their shared animosity toward the Houthis in Yemen, the rival royal families in power in Saudi Arabia and the UAE also came to back different sides of the country with their own irreconcilable objectives. By 2022, the Saudis decided to remove the internationally recognized government's incompetent president and replace him with an 8-member presidential leadership council to govern the country instead. The leader of the council was a Saudi-backed politician who favored national unity in Yemen. At the same time, his chief deputy was the head of the STC, who wanted to partition Yemen between the south and the north instead. They were never going to work together for very long, but they also entered into a ceasefire with the Houthis the same year, in 2022, that was initially only supposed to last for 6 months, but has been continually held ever since. Since December, when the front lines in Yemen suddenly shifted the most dramatically they had in years, between the STC and the internationally recognized government, the immediate questions on everyone's minds were, what would the STC do with their conquests? And how would the internationally recognized government and the Saudis end up responding? Taking the boldest option, the STC was conceivably capable of pursuing their ultimate objective of just unilaterally declaring their secession from Yemen and recreating the former state as South Yemen again, which they had already proposed calling South Arabia this time around instead. In theory, doing this without any outside foreign support would be a very dangerous and risky move. The world is not kind to rebellious territories of UN-recognized countries that unilaterally break away without the consent of their parent country. Other places that have done the same, like Somaliland, Abkhazia, and Kosovo, have faced decades of imposed isolation and non-recognition by large swaths of the international community. But the STC had plans to be different. Their leaders suggested that after they declared their independence, they would be willing to immediately accede to the Abraham Accords and recognize the State of Israel. Their hope was that this soft power would have given them the negotiating leverage they needed over the Trump administration to extend U.S. recognition towards their own independence, especially because there is already a major precedent for Trump overlooking international law and territorial integrity in exchange for recognition of Israel. Back in 2020, during Trump's first term in office, he agreed to extend U.S. recognition of Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara in exchange for Morocco's recognition of Israel, making the U.S. the first country to ever formally recognize Morocco's occupation of the territory. Trump is well known to want to continue extending the Abraham Accords in the Muslim world during his second term, to score more diplomatic victories that he can sell at home. The STC's assumption that he would probably be willing to extend American recognition of their independence in exchange for them becoming the next ones to join was not really that unrealistic, and by extension, joining the Abraham Accords would have easily secured Israel's recognition of its independence as well. The STC also likely believed that their ability to position themselves as a regional bulwark against the Houthis, and their control of nearly all of Yemen's oil and gas reserves, would help seal the deal with the Americans and Israelis as well. Joining the Abraham Accords and extending its recognition towards Israel would also further position the STC with its primary backer, the UAE, which itself joined the Abraham Accords and recognized Israel in 2020 as well. In late December 2025, Israel became the first UN member to recognize Somaliland, a breakaway state that has functioned independently since 1991. Somaliland is closely aligned with the UAE, which has invested $442 million in its Berbera port and built a military base there. Days after Israel's move, the UAE began accepting Somaliland passports, de facto recognition. If the STC succeeds in seceding from Yemen, the UAE could now recognize both new states, planting allies on both sides of the southern Red Sea. Add the UAE-backed RSF in Sudan, plus friendly Egypt and Israel to the north, and a picture emerges. A UAE-led bloc controlling the Red Sea's strategic trade routes, securing economic influence after oil. Saudi Arabia, watching its rivals' moves, is increasingly concerned about its own post-oil future. The race for Red Sea dominance is on, but from Saudi Arabia's perspective, the UAE's Red Sea strategy cannot appear as anything other than an Emirati attempt to encircle them. For years, the Saudis have been attempting to do everything they can to make the Houthis accept a power-sharing deal in a unified Yemen that would restrict their role in the government. Part of how they planned to do that was by offering the Houthis a share in the unified country's oil and gas resources that mostly exist in the south. So, with the prospect of the South seceding and taking basically all of the oil and gas with them, the Saudis were facing their worst-case scenario in Yemen. Without the oil and gas reserves, the internationally recognized government that they support would almost certainly be too weak to impose any kind of deal on sharing power with the Houthis in the north. And realistically, the Houthis would probably just eliminate them and politically dominate the remaining North Yemen rump state. Saudi Arabia would become trapped, with a radical, Iranian-backed Houthi Shiite theocracy directly on their southern border, that would be left chronically impoverished without any access to southern Yemen's oil and gas reserves. That is about as big a nightmare scenario for the Saudis as imaginable. Shortly after their offensive, the STC announced that they intended to hold a referendum on independence from the rest of Yemen within the next 2 years, by 2028. While the Saudis were consistently and strongly reiterating that all of this was completely unacceptable to them, within days of the STC's territorial takeovers, tens of thousands of Saudi-backed troops, loyal to the internationally recognized government, began mobilizing on the new front lines while threatening a major counteroffensive. Saudi Arabia demanded that the STC withdraw from all of the territories in Yemen they had seized, and gave them a week-long ultimatum to do so, or else. The STC consistently refused to withdraw. The week-long Saudi ultimatum passed, and the or else phase began. At the end of December, the Saudi Air Force launched airstrikes on the STC-controlled port city of Mukalla, bombing what it alleged were weapons shipments arriving at the STC from the UAE, which the UAE denied. The very next day, the internationally recognized government demanded that all UAE troops leave Yemeni territory within 24 hours and declared a state of emergency. And then, on the 2nd of January of 2026, the internationally recognized government declared that it was launching a so-called peaceful operation to regain control of the key military sites that the STC had seized in the Hadramaut province. Within minutes of the announcement, however, the Saudi Air Force already began launching airstrikes across southern Yemen against STC military targets with confirmed casualties. A military spokesperson for the STC said afterward that they were now in a decisive and existential war against the Saudi-backed forces in Yemen. Over the 3rd and 4th of January, troops loyal to the internationally recognized government, with Saudi aerial support, managed to rapidly and successfully counterattack across all of the Hadramaut and Al-Mara provinces. Not only did they reverse all of the territorial gains that had been made by the STC, but they also overran the coast of the Hadramaut province and captured the strategic port city of Mukalla, which the STC had controlled for years before they launched their offensive. On the 4th of January, after these decisive takeovers, the internationally recognized government's information minister reported to the New York Times that their next objective could be the STC's capital city of Aden, and demanded that the STC's forces in the area immediately surrender as the government reasserts its authority. By the 9th of January, it had become obvious that the STC was essentially a paper tiger, and their offensive to seize control over the eastern oil fields had all been a colossal miscalculation. With Saudi-backed troops breaking into the STC's capital of Aden, the STC's leader reportedly fled the country for exile in the UAE. And hours later, the STC's remaining leadership, under immense Saudi pressure, announced that it was completely dissolving altogether. With the Saudi-backed government troops overrunning all of the rest of the former STC-held territory, all within the span of just a single month, the STC had blitzed across Yemen in a nearly bloodless campaign. It seemed like it was inevitable that they were going to secede and recreate South Yemen again. And then they just immediately collapsed and fell apart about as quickly under the weight of this massive Saudi-backed counteroffensive. Hundreds of fighters on both sides have reportedly been killed since the internationally recognized government's counteroffensive began. While all of this has been greatly exacerbating the rising tensions between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, which will constrain both of their abilities to actually contain their mutual foe in Yemen, whom they had previously been cooperating against, the Houthis, who are now being presented with a golden opportunity. Immediately after they reach their ceasefires with Israel and the United States, the Houthis can refocus their attention back inward to expand their own control in Yemen during the chaos. The Houthis have, in fact, never before been in a better geopolitical position than they are currently. After 2 years of war with Israel, all of Iran's other proxies in the Middle East have been either crippled or outright destroyed. Hamas is in tatters in the ruins of Gaza. Most of Hezbollah's leadership has been killed and its fighting capacity severely degraded, while the Assad regime in Syria has been completely demolished and removed from the board altogether. The Houthis are the lone Iranian proxy in the region that not only remains intact, but if anything, is stronger than ever before. Their fight against Israel in solidarity with Gaza and their constant war footing has proven to be highly popular within Yemen and very effective at recruitment. In 2022, on the eve of the war with Israel, the Houthis had an estimated 220,000 fighters within their ranks, and by 2024, just a couple of years later, they had managed to grow that number dramatically to around 350,000 fighters, which is one of the largest armies controlled by any non-state power in the world, nearly the same size as the standing army of Turkey. And their numbers have probably only grown since then. While the STC and the internationally recognized government have controlled most of Yemen's geographic land and oil reserves, the Houthis have maintained their control over the most densely populated parts of the country, including the capital city, Sana'a. Roughly 3/4 of Yemen's population lives within Houthi-controlled territories, giving them dramatically more manpower to work with than their internal rivals. Their external struggle against Israel has been immensely popular within Yemen itself. At the same time, their military capabilities have been increasing dramatically since the war began as well. At the start of the war with Israel, the Houthis were not generally capable of striking Israeli territory directly. But by May of 2025, Houthi ballistic missiles were capable of accurately hitting the country's primary airport at Ben Gurion, near Tel Aviv. And in September of 2025, a Houthi drone was even capable of breaking through Israel's vaunted air defenses and impacting Ramon Airport near Israel's southern city of Eilat, injuring 22 people in the process. The Houthis have transformed. Long armed by Iran with missiles, drones, and training, they've now expanded their network. North Korean missiles with Hangul script have been fired at Israel. Russian P-800 Onyx anti-ship missiles are in their arsenal, and the Wall Street Journal reports Russian GRU units on the ground, providing targeting intelligence. Russia has also shipped oil through Houthi-controlled ports. China allegedly supplies dual-use components, while the Houthis have established joint operations with Somalia's al-Shabaab. After 2 years fighting the U.S. and Israel, the Houthis are more formidable than ever. With Iran's axis of resistance in tatters elsewhere, the Houthis now claim to lead the Arab world's resistance against the American-Israeli order. They dismiss the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt as American puppets, and their Yemeni proxies, like the STC, as puppets of puppets. Which brings us to the STC's fatal miscalculation. Their plan: secede, then recognize Israel in exchange for U.S. backing, made sense on paper. But within Yemen, Israel is wildly unpopular, especially in Houthi territory. The STC handed their enemy the ultimate propaganda weapon. The Houthis make their ultimate ambitions no secret. They want to unify Yemen's internationally recognized borders under their own control and crush their internal rivals, acquire all of their resources, and then use them for further rounds of fighting with Iran's backing against America and Israel and their allies, the Saudis and the Emiratis, in order to push Western influence out of the region for good. These goals, of course, have led the Houthis into direct conflict with virtually everyone around them before. And while they have taken some pretty heavy blows, they have never been able to be fully defeated from the outside. After attacking nearly 200 ships in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, after Israel launched its invasion of Gaza, including the hijacking of one ship and the sinking of 2 others, the Trump administration initiated Operation Rough Rider in early 2025, a series of massive air and naval strikes against Houthi radar systems, air defenses, and missile and drone storage and launch sites. About a month into the operation, the British Royal Air Force joined the Americans in the aerial campaign as well. Over 52 days, the U.S. carried out approximately 339 airstrikes and hit more than 1,000 targets in Houthi-controlled territory, dropping more than $1 billion worth of ordnance in the process. While the British carried out around another 80 additional airstrikes of their own as well. And on top of the military attacks, the U.S. began reapplying substantial economic pressure on the Houthis as well, by redesignating them as a foreign terrorist organization near the beginning of 2025, suffocating their access to the global banking system, and hampering their ability to pay their fighters and public service employees. The US, UK, and the Houthis eventually entered into a ceasefire in May of 2025, but the fight between the Houthis and the Israelis continued on for many more months afterward, and the Israeli airstrikes and attacks on the Houthis were probably more devastating than the American and British ones were. Israeli warplanes virtually destroyed most of the primary port that the Houthis control at Hodeidah. They were able to kill the Houthis' appointed prime minister with another strike in August of 2025. And in October, just before they agreed to their renewed ceasefire, they managed to successfully assassinate the Houthis' chief of staff as well. Nonetheless, none of these actions has substantially degraded the Houthis' capability to wage war. Unlike Hamas and Hezbollah, all of their primary leadership and command structures continue to remain alive and intact. With the U.S. and Israeli ceasefires in place, the Houthis have been freed up from 2 years of external war to shift their focus back towards the internal civil war within Yemen again, just at about the same time as their rivals are fighting amongst themselves. While the renewed U.S. sanctions placed on them have effectively removed Washington's ability to credibly threaten them with anything further, as has been proven by the last 2 years of the Americans and Israelis attempting to bomb the Houthis into submission, and the many years of the Saudis and Emiratis trying to bomb them into submission before that. Aerial strikes against the Houthis alone will never be enough to stop them or to contain their ambitions. The only thing that might be able to stop them, a ground invasion and an occupation, is completely unpalatable for anyone to consider. The territory the Houthis control in northern Yemen is extremely mountainous and rugged, like Afghanistan. At the same time, the large population of some 24 million people there is deeply anti-Western, and would be all but guaranteed to put up a fanatical resistance to such an operation. A ground invasion to topple the Houthis from power would probably require hundreds of thousands of troops in order to be successful. neither Washington nor Tel Aviv has any appetite or bandwidth to conduct the massive and costly operation it would take to truly remove the Houthis from the board. And the Houthis know it. While they also know that if the internationally recognized government and the STC begin fighting amongst themselves in Yemen, they are the ones who likely stand the most to gain from it. It is conceivable that the Houthis could press their advantage and push into the rest of the Marib province, that they currently split almost 50-50 with the internationally recognized government, which notably has most of the rest of the other 20% of Yemen's oil and gas fields, that the Houthis would feel more incentivized to seize if they know they are going to lose out on the bigger oil fields in the Hadramaut province at the same time. Or alternatively, they can also choose to advance south along the Red Sea coastline into the Taiz province, where they currently contest the regional capital with the internationally recognized government. The coastline in the province around the city of Mocha is currently controlled by forces that were aligned with the STC, but both STC and internationally recognized government forces have reportedly moved away from this theater to support the new campaign in the east, which might expose this area to renewed attacks from the Houthis. And to give you a sense of just how far down the list of priorities that Yemen has fallen on the Trump administration's agenda, there is currently not a U.S. envoy assigned to the country at all. At the same time, there is one assigned to Greenland for some reason, showing that the Trump administration is more focused on Greenland than it is on everything that is about to go down in Yemen, in the heart of one of the most critical trade arteries on the planet. Without the U.S. refocusing at least some attention on Yemen, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, both ostensibly U.S. allies, will seemingly continue on along their collision course that will enable the Houthis and their Iranian backers to take advantage of the vacuum. While the STC itself has now been dissolved, and all of its former territory has been overrun by the Saudi-backed forces in the country, that does not mean that the cause for South Yemen's independence has been completely lost. The STC's leader is still alive and well in exile in the UAE, while the cause for separatism in the south of the country also did not come from nowhere. It has already been reported that thousands of people have taken to the streets in Aden and other southern cities to protest in support of the separatist cause against the Saudi-backed government. While Saudi air power can likely continue suppressing any major attempt by the STC to regain their power, the Saudi-backed forces on the ground that now occupy the south cities like Aden, which were under de facto separatist control for nearly a decade before now, will probably have their work cut out for them, and might even face a long-term insurgency that could prove difficult to ultimately contain. But only time will tell. Hanging in the balance, the UAE stands to lose its keystone secession project in South Yemen that they need in order to connect to their other backed projects in Somalia and Sudan for control of the Red Sea. And with the Houthis still powerful and waiting in place to see what ends up happening, and a potential insurgency across the south from the now occupied separatists, the Saudis still stand at risk of witnessing the eventual partition of Yemen that could leave behind either one or two hostile states toward it directly on their southern border, fermenting instability for decades to come. The stage has been set for the next phase of the long and complicated civil war in Yemen. If you found value in this deep dive, if it helped you understand the complexity of the conflict, or gave you language for things you have been trying to grasp, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Infographics, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because understanding the forces that shape our world, even the most complicated and rapidly evolving ones, is the first step toward being able to navigate them. The situation in Yemen is a reminder that in the Middle East, nothing is ever simple. Alliances are never permanent, and the only certainty is that the next dramatic twist is always just around the corner. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.